There's a lot that we don't talk about, sometimes due to embarrassment, fear, insecurities. We neglect discussions about the most common parts of our lives, things we all deal with, sometimes every day. But on the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast, together, we'll break all of those taboos and talk open and honest about shared experiences. Knowledgeable people relating things you felt but never put into words. Parenting, sex, fitness, energy, anything to connect you to your authentic self, unfiltered. Now, the Caffeinated Gypsy herself, a free spirit, world traveler with a passion for fitness and exploring topics that others might avoid. Hello and welcome to the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast. I'm Stephanie Cotton, your host. Thank you guys so much for being with me today. I have a lot of cool stuff going on right now, and I'm really excited to share with everybody. And I'm going to be honest, I'm excited to talk about today's subject, but I'm also a little bit nervous because we're talking about vulnerability, and that makes me uncomfortable. So before we get into that, updates. I have a moon workshop going on at Gypsy Jewel in Raleigh, North Carolina on Thursday. This is going to be on October 10th, and this is going to be at 6 o'clock. So if you want to purchase a ticket to that, you can do that through my website. There's a link, or you can go to Gypsy Jewel and you can purchase that, or you can go on Instagram, and we both have links in our Instagram account. So if you want to come hang out for the evening, and we're going to be talking moon phases. What are the moon phases and how do you work with them? I feel like this is one of those areas that gets kind of confusing sometimes. People aren't really sure what to do with the new moon versus the full moon. We're going to talk about different rituals you can do. We're going to talk about how you can charge your crystals, and also how you can build like a little altar with the moon. And what else do we have going on? Coffee, as always. If you want to get some delicious single origin, organic, crystal charged, saged, sound charged, Reiki charged coffee, you know I'm the girl for that. You can go over to my website, and there are descriptions of each coffee. The pumpkin spice version, so magic and spice, that's only going to be available until October 31st. So if you want to stock up on that, do that now, because that will not be available again until next October. Patreon, if you are looking for some really rad ladies to hang out with, I got y'all covered. You can join Patreon at Patreon Caffeinated Gypsy, or you can go on my website. And I think that's all of the updates. So, vulnerability. I feel like everybody's kind of sort of talking about this right now. If you've watched Brene Brown on Netflix, she's the one that has that TED Talk about vulnerability. And now she's got this Netflix special. So everybody's watched it, and everybody's kind of like, oh yeah, we should probably talk about vulnerability. What's funny is, so I'm just going to jump into this because I am an Aquarius, so we're going to put that out there first. First, I feel like your vulnerability has a lot to do with your astrological sign, right? Because you're born with these certain characteristics. So naturally, as an Aquarius, we tend to be a little bit more guarded. I don't want to say we're aloof, but we just don't wear our heart on our sleeve, and we tend to really kind of be more reserved. So I'm naturally just a little bit more of a reserved person. I pay attention to everything and kind of watch everybody. As a natural born leader, I try to think about things as a whole. So a lot of times I don't put a lot of myself emotionally out there to people, just because I'm trying to take care of everybody. But this is something that comes up a lot just in my own life. And I feel like this is something that comes up for a lot of people. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something really uncomfortable, and I'm going to talk about some things that have kind of popped up in my life. And so one of the things I did today before I started to record this is I put a question on my Facebook group, And I also put a question on Instagram and I asked, what holds you back from being vulnerable or sharing your vulnerability? And hands down, everybody put the word fear in there. And I'm not going to share people's names, but I'm just going to read you a couple of the responses that I got to this. And by the way, thank you guys so much for sharing. I got so many of these, I'm really just going to read a couple of them. Fear of others, that they'll use it against me. Fear of ridicule or rejection. Judgment of fear, not being lovable. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment. And this, I could keep going on and on and on, right? So there's a huge fear behind being vulnerable. But yet this is what everybody wants us to be, right? Everybody's always like, you're not being vulnerable. Share yourself, share yourself. But there's so much that goes into vulnerability, right? And so for me personally, this is an area that is hard for me. It's super, super hard. And so this holds us back in so many different areas of our life. So for me personally, I have a very big fear of people feeling like I'm not good enough or people leaving. Like those are my two big, huge fears. And so for a really long time, I would hide that part of myself and I put on a very hard exterior. So I always equate myself to like an M&M. I have a very hard shell, but I'm actually like gooey chocolate in the middle. I'm really good at being able to keep a brave face on, not show my emotions. And, in some aspects of my life, this is really, really good. It served me. And in some aspects, it's not. It's not always easy for people to be able to, people don't always know how to take that. Because I'm not an overly emotional person. And so it's really easy for people to target because I am not an emotional person. And so on the flip side, I am very, very emotional internally. I'm very, very sensitive. And a lot of that has to do with some of my other astrological placements. And it has a lot to do with some of the trauma that I've experienced. And so I've always kind of go back and forth from, how much do I share? How much do I keep internal? So I usually will share things sort of like after they've happened. I don't usually jump in and go, hey, this is what's going on with me. And a lot of that is my own coping mechanisms. A lot of that is just, how I've been conditioned from my childhood. And so I've been going through stuff lately and I've kept everything very much close to my heart because, nobody wants to get on a podcast and listen to somebody like, oh, I have depression. Oh, I'm so sad. Nobody wants to listen to that. And so I try to share minimal, and I've been really working hard to sort of take care of myself. So something has come up and I was like, instead of doing what I normally do, which is sort of retreating and going into myself, I'm like, we're going to work through this. We're going to face the scary shit. And so last year when I was like, okay, we're going to do a podcast, the biggest fear is always oh my gosh, I'm about to put myself out there to the whole entire world. Right. And so when you do something like that, you're basically opening yourself up for ridicule and for people to be assholes because, there's assholes in the world. And so that, for me, I had to really sit with that and be like, okay, how much do I really want to show up in my life? And so, I don't know about you guys, but I've always got this devil and angel sort of sitting on my shoulder. There's the side of me that knows my purpose and knows what I need to do. I always call this my soul side. And then the very human side of me is oh, but there's all this trauma and all this stuff that's stopping me. And there's fears and all of this stuff, right? And so I always kind of go back and forth and I'm constantly waging war, these two sides. And so when I started all this, I was like, okay, the thing that always stops you in your tracks is this fear of judgment, right? And as much as I'm oh, fuck it, I don't care what people think, there's obviously a level that I do care or it wouldn't stop me. And that's all of us. I just don't think that anybody just truly just doesn't give a shit. I think that different things affect people differently and, your level of caring is different, So for me, there are certain areas where I'm oh, I don't really give a shit. And then there's other areas where I'm I very much do care. And so how do we get past that, right? So for the last year, I've been working through that very much so. And I'm okay, I'm going to put myself out there a little bit. And then I'm holy shit, I just did that. This is crazy. And, I work sort of in seasons. And I know that fall time for me historically is a little bit more challenging. And I always start things in the fall, which is super funny. I don't know if that's just because I'm a masochist or what the deal is, but I always start things. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I just started this. And now I'm like in the pit of like everything right now. And so last year I did this huge leap and I was like, I'm going to put a chakra book out there and I'm going to start a podcast. So there's not much else I could have done to literally be like, hey, look at me, and look at this guide that I'm giving you to help you heal yourself, because that was something I felt very strongly I needed to do, but it was like, holy shit, I'm about to put this out there. And, not everybody's nice. And so I've been kind of working through that. And in the past, I have been like, oh my gosh, somebody just said something super, super mean. I'm going to go hide. And now I'm like, okay, nope, we're gonna step out there and we're gonna do this. And so I've been working through, just being a little bit more public and putting myself out there. And the thing about all of that is when you're vulnerable, people pick up on that, right? And so I'm very honest with you guys. Like, I am still working through my stuff. I think everybody's still working through their stuff, right? My two core issues are not being good enough and being left, right? So I was left very early on. My dad left, and that caused me a great deal of trauma. I have a great deal of trauma from just my childhood and things that have happened about not being good enough. And no matter how much education I have or how much, work I do, this is just something that's always an underlying theme. And so I believe very much in the law of attraction. And so I know because of that underlying theme that I attract certain types of people into my life. And guys, if you're doing the work, it's just a long process. Like, I still work on my chakras. I'm still doing all the work every single day. It's just, I'm dealing with, and just like most of you are probably dealing with, ancestral history of this stuff being passed over and some past life stuff. So the energetic vibration runs deep. Does that make me less than? Absolutely not. And it's taken me a really long time to go, you know what? Just because I'm still working through my shit does not mean that I don't have a right to share all of this knowledge. It doesn't mean that I'm less than. It doesn't mean that I'm a fraud or whatever. And when you have had that type of trauma, it's very easy to fall into that, like, I am not good enough. I should not share this. I'm not going to do this. And so as I've worked through all of these steps and I've, done all these trainings and, I educated myself to death because I was so afraid that somebody was going to be like, you don't have a right to do this. And you know what? All of that education didn't do anything for how I felt about myself. That was the work that I had to do internally. And it's really taken me going, okay, like, you know what? What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, what's the worst, right? And so we've gone a whole year now, right? And last year I started this and I was like, oh, okay. I was working through it and I go into like my state of seasonal depression every fall, never fails. Last year I was really riding that momentum of getting my book out there and the podcast, and I still was struggling with my depression. And you guys, my depression, it is a chemical imbalance. And I have had a really hard time, like just for myself, accepting that and going, you know what? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not weak. It's not any different than somebody else having, whatever, cancer or whatever. It's a condition. Like, I have a actual chemical imbalance in my brain. Serotonin drops and I start to feel really bad. And so I have to work through that. And, thank goodness I have an amazing support system and I know these things are happening, and everybody that is close to me kind of rallies around and they help get me like on a plan, and everybody really works with me. Thank goodness for that. But it's challenging. And for most of my life, it's been something I'm like, we're just going to hide, right? I'm just going to go find my little hole somewhere and I'm just going to hide, because to me, I perceive this as a weakness for a very long time. And I still grapple with this, you guys. So I'm sure if you have any type of depression, you're like shaking your head like, yes, right? Because, even still to this day, as much education as we have about it, there's still a stigma behind having depression or any type of mental illness. So this year I kind of came into my state of depression. And if you notice, like, there's not as many podcasts out, and I've been really trying to work through this. And I'm like, I don't want to get on my podcast and be like, guys, I'm depressed this week, because it's not what my podcast is about, right? But it's also a very real part of who I am. And so I've been working through that, and I'm working through my own fear of not being good enough, or people judging me and being like, oh gosh, all she does is talk about her problems, and all of these things that come up when you've had trauma, right? Or when you've lived in environments where people have been codependent upon you and your well-being. Then you're like, well, I don't want to tell everybody what's going on with me, or I don't want people to think that I'm not strong, right? Because there's this fear of being vulnerable, because all these other people have said, we're afraid of being judged. That's a scary feeling. So I have decided this year, I'm like, you know what? We're just going to fuck it. We're going to face it. But I also know I attract a certain type of person because I still have this underlying vibration. And as much as I want to sit here and be like, nope, I have completely cleared up all of my shit, guys. I only attract good. I don't. I just don't. And kudos if there's somebody out there and you're listening and somebody that's able to just fix it, please send me their information, because I would gladly take it. And I would gladly do whatever they said. But I honestly, truly, in my heart of hearts, don't believe that when you're dealing with ancestral trauma, when you're dealing with lifetimes of patterns, that it's as easy as going, okay, I'm going to do some chakra work. I'm going to go and do some yoga, and maybe I do some, saging or whatever things you do, that it just goes away like that. I think it's about really stepping in and acknowledging hey, this is a pattern, and working through this over and over and over again. And so I took some really big strides in the last few months. I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to put some stuff out there, and I'm going to just face it. So in the past, I've been like, I'm going to shrink back, and I'm just going to, scurry away. And then nobody's going to see me. And now I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And so knowing that I have this kind of a vibration, it's always a running joke, everybody's like, you attract the craziest people. And I'm like, I attract this stuff because I attract wounded people, because I'm wounded, right? And when you're wounded, you attract people that are wounded. And so sometimes you can come together and everybody works through their stuff, and sometimes I'm a little bit further in my journey and I have a lot of tools so I can help people, and then sometimes it doesn't work that way. And I know this, and that's just how it is. So for me, it's always been this oh, somebody's going to say something. They're going to be like, you're not a good person, or you're not that. They're going to, say I'm a fraud or whatever. And it happened. And I was like, okay, this is my moment, right? I sat there and I was reading this terrible email somebody had sent me. And my instinct was oh my God, delete this. Don't let anybody ever know, because then everybody's going to know, right? And it's, you guys, it's you have those moments where you're like, this is it. This is one of those life-defining moments. I had one of those. And so I'm sitting with my husband, and we're literally, we're buying a car, right? And I'm going through and I read this and I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody sent me the meanest email. And it was somebody had if they could open up a window into my soul and see every fear, they said it. And I was like, okay, this is the moment. And so this is that moment where you're standing there and you're super vulnerable. And in the past, right, because I'm dealing with my depression, I would have spiraled. That would have been it. I would have had a little bit of a mental breakdown. I would have gone home. I would have crawled under the covers, and that's where I would have stayed for a long time. And I just sat there and I looked at my husband. I was like, read this. And he was just like, what? And I was like, I think I'm okay though. And I was so proud of myself, because I was like, this is it. I'm going to face my shadow part, right? And I said, but I don't deserve that. And none of this stuff is true. And it's okay, right? So I sat there and I was like, everything I believe, like the law of attraction, I am very, very strong. I can attract pretty much whatever I want in my life. We all can. And when we're worried about these things, we usually attract the things that we want the least, right? Because it's like it seems for whatever reason, it's like this underlying theme, and it's so strong. And here I am, fearful of being rejected, fearful of people thinking like, bad things about me, even though I try really hard to live my life to the best of my ability as a good person. And I was like, here it is. And now I get to stand here and go, okay, I get to decide. Does this define me? Does somebody else's opinion of me get to define who I am? No, it doesn't. Right? I get to decide that. And I get to decide if this breaks me. And I realized in that moment, I was like, this is it. This is the universe going, okay, Stephanie, you get to decide. Do you keep reliving these patterns over and over again and being in this state of fear? Or do you go, okay, I'm going to let myself kind of shine. I'm going to stop holding that part of myself back, and I move along. Because those fears only become powerful if you allow them to become powerful, right? That's it. So you give somebody the power to make you feel worthless. You've given them all that power. Sure, people are going to leave. Like, people have left my life. And I could very easily be like, this is a reflection of me, but it's not. This is a reflection of them not being in my life for their own reasons, and that's completely okay. So being vulnerable is fucking scary. Being vulnerable has held me back from so many things in my life, because the second I start to get to this point where people might actually see me, I shrink back. Because I have these wounds. We all have them in some way, shape, or form, right? My wound it's one of those core wounds, right? I talk about this a lot when I talk about chakras. Like, anything that happens in the first 7 years of your life really like sticks with you for most of your adult life. It never really goes away because it's imprinted on you. So my father deciding to leave at the age of 5, and literally hearing him say, I don't want to be your dad. I don't want to be responsible for you. That stuck with me. And so now there's this wound on my soul that says, nobody's going to want you. I mean, if your dad doesn't want you, who's going to want you, right? So I've carried that around to the point where I've pushed my husband away, and so many times in my life, because I'm like, it's better to just push you away, to the point where I'm like, maybe if I just attract really broken people and then they do things to hurt me or they leave, then I'm not surprised. Because that's what you do when you're wounded. Those are your coping mechanisms. It's textbook. But when you go, okay, we're going to approach this differently. We're just going to face it, right? It's like going into the closet when there's a boogeyman and you're like, the boogeyman's in the closet. All right. I'm scared. Turn the light on. Oh, there's nothing here, right? It's that same thing. It only has power when you give it power. So me looking at this situation and going, oh, God, that was mean. Like that hurt my feelings. But now I faced that. And that was the very worst thing that I could think of, was somebody being like, you're a fraud. I don't think you're a good person. You have issues, whatever. Like all of these things. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not a fraud. I'm very true to who I am. And that's okay if you think that. That's fine. I'm not for everybody. But for me, that was that moment in my life where I was like, okay, now we're stepping over that threshold to the next level. And that's what vulnerability does. It allows you to face those things and go, okay, all right, I'm here, I'm showing up. And yeah, you said that. Yeah, maybe you don't like me. Okay, but I didn't die. Right? But did you die? No. It's scary. And nobody wants to feel like people are thinking bad of them. But you know what? It's the power that we give them. It's the energy we're allowing them to have. And when we start to face that stuff, it loses its power, right? I was listening to this book by Mel Robbins called Take Control of Your Life, because I've been really big on this lately, right? I'm like, okay, what's holding me back? Because I'm always trying to get better. I'm always trying to like make myself stronger and better, because I know like I've got trauma. I've got stuff I'm still working through, and I will never ever be done with this work. I know I won't. This is my contract. This is what I signed up for, and that's okay. So I've been going through this book, and she talks about how you can really like gain control and you can stop being fearful. And one of the things she talks about is how when we want to do things, like we have these ideas, say we want to be an entrepreneur, we build up these like huge like expectations, and they're so big that we can't even like meet them. And we do this because there's just fear, right? And so I'm listening to this and I'm like, she's like, we build up these huge unrealistic expectations because once they're so big, we're like, oh, we'll never be able to do that. Or when we, start working towards something and it doesn't meet the expectation, we're like, oh, can't do it, failed. And I was like, man, how many times have I done that in my life where I'm like, I'm going to do this. And then when I'm not like instantly like super successful, I'm like, well, that sucks. I wasn't supposed to do this. Right? Because I've done that so many times. And so last year when I started my podcast, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to build this up to something that it's not. And I didn't even realize like I was working through this, but I was like, I'm just going to be like happy if anybody listens. But periodically throughout the year, I've been like, man, I wish this was like viral. What am I doing wrong? And my husband, oh, thank God, he's like, but you're impacting people, right? And I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, then it matters. Like you're doing what you're supposed to do. It matters. And Mel Robbins talks about that. She's like, your goals are like Legos. When we're building something big, right? It's those little bitty Lego pieces. And we put one piece on and it takes us to the next and it takes us to the next level. And so I've really been trying to think about that. Like, how do I, in my life personally, like how do we build up to this? How do we celebrate these little things that we're doing instead of being defeated because we're not reaching these huge goals? And so for me, it's always been like, okay, I'm going to have this crazy big goal. Not that there's anything wrong with big goals, but I'm going to set a goal that's so big. And if I don't reach it instantly, or if anybody says anything that's like, deters me, I'm going to be like, well, I can't do this, right? And so this last year has been about like, okay, we're going to celebrate all these little things. And I am not good at this, guys. This is something I'm working through still. And I share this stuff with you guys because I want you to know, like 100%, that I do not have it all figured out. But I have a lot of tools and I'm working through it and I'm pretty good at what I do. And I want to help you, and I want you to take whatever piece of information from me that resonates with you, and maybe you continue to listen, or maybe you just take that and you go to somebody else. That's totally fine. Like, that's what my purpose on this earth is to just help people continue their healing journey. And every time somebody's like, oh my gosh, this helped, I'm like, oh, there's another little piece to my like Lego building, right? I'm building up to that. And it's the same thing for you. You can do the same exact thing. It's about allowing yourself to really step into that vulnerability, taking that power away from other people. And I know, oh my gosh, y'all, I'm not even going to sit here and tell you that I've got this all figured out. And I think I'm going to be working on this fear of judgment probably my whole entire life. But I'm telling you, to have that aha moment, and I'm 38 years old, to go, you did not break me. This did not break me. I was afraid this would break me, and it did not break me. And I'm not crying in the bed right now. You can do this. So it's taking those things, whatever that is. If it's like you want to go and put your art out there somewhere, just take a little step. It doesn't have to be the big end result. It's that little thing of putting yourself out there and being just vulnerable enough and going, it doesn't matter. Even if people hate it, I will not die. I will be okay. And every time you take that step forward, it builds up your confidence just a little bit more, right? The other thing I want to tell you guys is, the way you choose to show your vulnerability is 100% your fucking business. Just like for me, it's 100% my business. If I want to give you all of my life details, I mean, I won't, but that's up to me. And if you want to go out and you want to share all of yourself with people, then you do that. But if you don't, that's okay too. You're the only person who knows what level of vulnerability you want to share. Not everybody needs to know all of your vulnerability. Not everybody needs to see that part of you, but make sure you're showing it enough when it matters. Don't let it hold you back. That's my point, is be vulnerable enough to take those steps forward, to do the things that you want to do, because that's what holds us back. We're afraid of being seen. So we don't do those things. And we step back from ourselves and we go, oh, somebody's not going to like this. Somebody's going to think this of me. You know what? Everybody's got it. Everybody's got the same shit. It might be packaged a little bit differently, but everybody's got this fear of vulnerability on some way, shape, or form. Even the people that are being mean or that are judging you, they all have it. We all have it. We are all here just trying to do our fucking best. Or at least we should be. So my challenge to you is just take that little step. If it's, like I said, if it's putting your art out there, do one little thing. Put it out there. Don't allow yourself to be paralyzed by this fear of being seen because of judgment. It's not worth it. So that's my advice on vulnerability for you guys. And like I said, I'm very funny about how much I want to share, but I feel like this was something that I wanted you guys to hear from me because it's something I'm struggling with. I think we all are. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we support each other through this, the easier it's going to be more authentic and vulnerable with each other. So I want to go ahead and thank you in advance for listening and for supporting what I'm doing, because it really does mean the world to me and it really does keep me going. So thank you guys so much, and until the next one.